Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. I got an email from Michael Young, subject line, 1976 video with second coming quote. And in the email, hi, I was listening to this old BYU devotional by Mark E. Petersen, and then he provides the link. Just a few minutes in, he talks about how the purpose of the founding of the United States was not only to restore the church, but specifically to prepare the world for the second coming. I'm not sure if you have this quote on your radar yet, but I thought it was really interesting and might make a good video. Might make a good video heading into the patriotic holidays. Yeah, because we have the 4th of July coming up. And then Michael says, "Have a great week." Thank you so much, Michael. And it has been a good week already so far. Just really quick, just yesterday, last night, we were in bed. I was ready just to start the night and then go to sleep. You know, we usually watch some shows before we go to bed, but I was just having this craving for cookies and cream ice cream, which I never have cravings for ice cream like that. And so I was like, I talked to Jenica and I'm like, I want to go get some ice cream. She's like, I want some too, but I want this flavor. We were going to go to our closest Walmart, but it didn't have the flavor that she wanted. And so we had to go to the next closest one. And because of that, as we were driving, it made it so that the timing was just right to where I could be here at the temple lot at the peak intensity of this rainbow, which of course, photos never do it justice, but we were there when it was at its peak. And I got this amazing photo of this rainbow. I mean, as viewed from where I was above the temple lot. So I was really excited about that. It just makes for a really cool photo. I like how you have the temple site right here, the sign for it, and then in the background you have the church visitor center right here. Okay, and then also yesterday, make sure to follow me on Instagram and on Facebook. But I was invited by the prophet president of the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is right across the street from the Community of Christ Temple. His name is President Terry Patience, and he gave me a tour of their entire building, including this recently dedicated, what they call a sanctuary, which is like a temple space. It was dedicated in 2023. It's brand new to their church. This is like a remnant of what was originally the RLDS Church, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's many branches, but this is kind of like the largest one, and they have that building by the temple lot. And so I got to see inside their sanctuary, and this is it. They have 2 pulpits, one for the Aaronic priesthood, one for the Melchizedek priesthood, kind of similar to the Kirtland Temple, but without the 3-tiered pulpits. So I have some more that's going to come out about that. I'm going to put it on my social media accounts, and maybe at some point in the future I'll interview him. But it has been a really interesting week. Now, before I get into this devotional, the person sending me the email, you may already recognize the name. This is Michael. He has this channel called Mic Drop Music. Make sure to subscribe to him. I'll put a link for this in the description box below. And me and Jen from Christian Fire Poppy have interviewed him because he's also a member of the Tabernacle Choir. And in this video, he gives the very interesting account about the October 2024 General Conference, right after President Nelson's, well, during and then after President Nelson's second coming talk. So if you missed this, you may want to watch it. I'll put a link for it in the description box below. Okay, so here's the link that Michael provided. I'll put this in the description box below. And thankfully, it's transcribed and it's on BYU speeches, which is not always the case. So this is a talk called America World Leader. And it was given on July 4th of 1976. That is a great day for a talk like this because 1976 was the bicentennial of the United States. It was also in that year, as I recently learned, probably about a month or 2 ago, maybe 3 months, that the governor of Missouri rescinded the extermination order given by Governor Boggs of Missouri back when the Saints were expelled. It wasn't until the bicentennial of the United States, sorry, excuse me. It wasn't until the bicentennial of the United States that was rescinded. Okay, so let me read this excerpt from his talk. As I speak to you here tonight, I would like for you to have in mind that there was only one reason why the United States came into being. Only one. It is a different reason from anything that we know in any other nation. There's a United States only because God planned to restore the gospel in the last days, and he had to have a free country in which to do it, with freedom of worship, freedom of press, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. He declared that he would make this the greatest nation in the world, and this he has done. Ours is indeed the greatest nation on earth, and it was made so by the Almighty himself. It was made so to fulfill the divine destiny given to us by the Lord. That is why the Book of Mormon prophets declared that this land is choice above all other lands in the earth. It is it is the destiny of America which makes her the greatest nation on earth. No other nation has ever conceived and no nation was ever conceived and set up as was ours. No other nation has been given a destiny such as ours. What is that destiny? You'll be surprised when I say this, but it is nevertheless true. The destiny of the United States of America is to play an important part in helping to prepare for the second coming of Christ. It is that important. That is the reason the United States was set up. Really quick before I continue. So obviously, as he says here, the United States was set up so that there would be the conditions in which the church could be restored. And I think that is the core purpose, but I think that the United States probably is doing more than just that. For example, we have the Constitution, which virtually every other country in the world that has a constitution has patterned it after ours. And so you have this new form of government that came into being and is blessing the entire world. And I think is preparing the world politically for the second coming, because I'm not going to read the quotes right now, but I have a bunch of quotes talking about the fact that when Christ comes, he is going to be king, but the government is going to resemble the government that we have right now. There's going to be a constitution. You're going to have the separation of powers. Even though he will be king, it's going to be, I think Brigham Young referred to it as like a theocratic republic or democracy or something like that. So it's not like this is just going to go away. And so the United States was not only a place where the church was restored, but it's also set the pattern for government that in some way is going to continue into the millennium during Christ's reign. And there's probably many other things, most likely, its involvement in the final war, which leads to Christ coming to the Jews, and probably so many other things that we don't realize, or I can't think of right now. If you can think of any others, put it in the comments below. Okay, continuing. The preparation for the second coming of Christ depended largely on the restoration of the gospel. There cannot be a restoration of the gospel without freedom. God provided this country as the base of his operations in these days, the last days, as a place where there would be freedom, where he could restore his gospel. Therefore, the United States was given and is yet to be given a great mission in respect to the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. God has made the United States the base of operations for his work in these modern times, just as he used Palestine as his center of operations in ancient times. Okay, now this is an interesting concept. We should always keep this clearly in mind. As Palestine was the center for the Lord's operations in ancient times, just so in the same manner is the United States the center of his operations in these days. Now, that reminds me of, and by the way, what we're reading right now, I've added this to my quotes, Second Coming spreadsheet. I'm trying to get all quotes, not just recent quotes, but all quotes that I can find about the Second Coming and put them all on this timeline. Okay. But it made me think about this quote from President Nelson. This comes from the October 2022 Liahona, an article called The Everlasting Covenant. And he said, "The tribe of Judah was given responsibility to prepare the world for the first coming of the Lord. From that tribe, Mary was called upon to be the mother of the Son of God. The tribe of Joseph, through his and Asenath's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, was given the responsibility to lead in the gathering of Israel to prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. And we know that the lands of America, both North and South America, were given as an inheritance to Joseph and his sons. So it makes sense. And you can go beyond this. We've talked about the feast days from the Bible, or what sometimes people refer to as the Jewish feast days, but it's the feast days given by the Lord in the Old Testament. And they kind of center on these two times of year, spring and fall. And in Judaism, spring, the main, what you could say is the main month, or the first month of spring, in Judaism corresponds with the tribe of Judah. It's the month of Nisan. And then in the fall, the leading month, the first month of fall, is Tishri. That's when you have the other holy days in the fall. In that one corresponds to Ephraim. So it makes sense. So let's go ahead and go back to this. Okay. For centuries, he preserved this land from colonization by unwanted groups. Then he set up this nation by his power and for his purpose. That purpose was to provide the free conditions under which he could restore the gospel in the last days. Here, he gave us an inspired constitution so that his church could move forward with full guarantee of freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of assembly, and freedom of press, all of which were essential to his work. Dictatorship is the opposite of free agency. Free agency is part and parcel of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Hence, free agency was required here in America so that God's work could move forward, and so it must. For the day of the Lord draweth nigh, and the ultimate destiny of the United States is rapidly emerging. So he says this back in 1976, and obviously it's probably even more rapid right now as we speak. A lot of things have happened since 1976. One thing that I'll say that may not come to mind immediately is that we've seen the birth of the internet come from the United States, right? We have like computers in general, that I don't know everywhere that computing started, but obviously the United States has given birth to these really big tech companies. Very important. That's how I'm doing this podcast right now, is because of what has come out of the United States. The internet, and then software companies, computer companies, tech. And that has gone a very long way toward preparing the world for the second coming. I had this thought the other day because whenever we talk about this whole thing about the gospel having to go to every nation, kindred, and tongue, and people and tribe, I've talked about how, well, we have immigration, people coming from other countries, sometimes refugees because of war, that come to countries where they have a chance to come across the gospel, whereas wherever they came from, they did not. So that's one way that the gospel is going to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. But then on top of that, I had this thought the other day that it's not just that necessarily, like the missionaries going to people. Because of the internet, people are more easily able to find the gospel on their own. And as far as them having a chance to accept the gospel, I can't say this for sure, but there may not be a need for a missionary at all. You could have, I believe that this is true. You could have people that read all about the church themselves. They read the Book of Mormon themselves. Maybe they come across podcasts like mine, or whatever, but they come across the church through the internet and they teach themselves. And the Lord's like, okay, well, so what do you think? Do I need to send you missionaries? Are you ready to do this? Do you want to get baptized? So I don't know that there's any way to tell how far the gospel has spread. And it doesn't matter what country we're talking about. If they have access to the internet, then the spreading of the gospel, the preaching of the gospel may have gone much, much further than anyone ever imagined. And all of this because of the internet and technology and the United States. So when he says back in 1976, before the internet, that the United States is the purpose, the ultimate destiny of the United States is rapidly emerging, I think we're well into that. I really do. Okay, continuing. Here in the USA, the Lord's Latter-day Zion has been established already. Here in the USA, his Latter-day New Jerusalem will yet be established. Because he's referring to Jackson County. There's people that think that it's Salt Lake City or something like that. No, I have all these quotes saying it is still Jackson County, but in this case, he's talking about the literal city. Okay. Here in the USA, the Lord will preside during the millennium. From here will go forth the law and the word of the Lord to all nations of the earth. The restored gospel is already going from this land to all other free nations. It does so under the protection of the United States, and we who travel do so on American passports. Eventually, America will be the center of the final gathering of God's people as the millennium approaches, and our flag will fly right on into that blessed time. Okay? The flag of the United States will fly on into the millennium. Now we're transitioning to another idea. Here's a section of his talk called Prophecies About America. And he says, Brigham Young said, quote, "When the day comes in which the kingdom of God will bear rule, the flag of the United States will proudly flutter unsullied on the flagstaff of liberty and equal rights, without a spot to sully its fair surface. The glorious flag our fathers have bequeathed to us will then be unfurled to the breeze by those who have power to hoist it aloft and defend its sanctity." End quote. And then Elder Marky Petersen continues. So America will not fall. You'll have to go through a cleansing, however, so that wickedness may be abolished, but the nation as such will not fall. I am highlighting this because you have this idea that the United States has to be destroyed, that the United States specifically has to be cleansed. Keep in mind that when he says that you'll have to go through a cleansing, he's saying it in the context of the second coming in general, in which the entire world is going to be cleansed. But there's this idea that the United States has to be destroyed, has to be cleansed, that it's going to fall. And that's not true. I have this spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. Row 26 is currently America, cleansing of, destruction of, etc. And I have all these quotes, including the one that we're reading right now, that talk about the fact that we should be optimistic about the future of the United States, that we shouldn't assume that it's going to fail. And that's exactly what a lot of people do that are members of the church. Let me read a few of these really quick. This is, at the time, Elder Harold B. Lee of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He later became president of the church. April 1942 General Conference. But beyond all that, the Latter-day Saints have a responsibility that may be better understood when we recall the prophecy of Joseph Smith, who declared that the time would come when the destiny and the constitution of these United States would hang, as it were, by a thread, and that this people, the sons of Zion, would rise up and save it from threatened destruction. I want to ask you to consider the meaning of that prophecy in the light of the declaration of the prophets of the Book of Mormon times, who declared that this land was a choice land above all other lands, and would be free from bondage and from captivity and from all other nations under heaven, if they will but serve the God of this land, even our Savior, Jesus Christ. This is a people whom the Lord has chosen to preach the gospel of righteousness. Okay, so we're talking about preaching the gospel, not, certain people going to Washington D.C., being elected president necessarily, or some other way of saving the Constitution. Because a lot of times people will come up with these theories and ideas that it's like along those lines. And that could be, I guess. But look what he says. This is a people whom the Lord has chosen to preach the gospel of righteousness. We talk of security in this day, and yet we fail to understand that here on this temple block, we have standing the holy temple wherein we may find the symbols by which power may be generated that will save this nation from destruction. Okay, so preaching the gospel, the temple. Therein may be found the fullness of the blessings of the priesthood. Yesterday morning, as we were assembled here and heard the broadcast from that place, broadcasting to the world a message, it to me was significant of the prophecy that from this place the law shall go forth to the world, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. The spires of the eastern towers of the temple are to represent the presidency of the Melchizedek priesthood. The spires to the west, the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood. The gilded figure of the angel Moroni symbolizes the preaching of the gospel to the world. The gospel must be preached as a witness under the direction of the holy priesthood. Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Therein lies the responsibility of this church in sanctifying this people and this nation, that they might be spared the judgments that otherwise might come upon them, were it not for the preaching of the humble elders of this church. And we know that the gospel has relatively been well received in the United States, because when you look at the number of members of the church in every country of the world, the United States is still the biggest. A lot of people like to harp on the United States. Like, usually people that see the America going in the wrong direction, and in a lot of ways it is. You know, the world is the world as well, but the world and America are becoming more and more secular and embracing things that are abominations to the Lord. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, you're still having all these baptisms. And I'm not sure that the majority of the United States has to be righteous, so much as we have a righteous people, of a very sizable population of righteous people that live in the United States, in all the states. You know, of course, we have more in Utah, like when we're talking about percentages, but we have saints throughout the entire United States. We almost have a temple in every state. I can't remember how many are still missing, but it's probably something like 5, if that. So anyway, just keep that in mind. And then we have this, and at this point, he's now President Harold B. Lee. This is a BYU Idaho devotional. At that time, I guess it would have been Rick's College, but you can find it on byui.edu, October 25th, 1973. He says, I think we must be on the optimistic side. This is a great nation. This is a great country. This is the most favored of all lands. While it is true that there are dangers and difficulties that lie ahead of us, we must not assume that we are going to lie down and watch the country go to ruin. We should not be heard to predict ills and calamities for the nation. And that's exactly what some members of the church do. A prophet says, we should not be heard to predict ills and calamities for the nation. On the contrary, we should be providing optimistic support of the nation. You must remember, brethren, that this church is one of the most powerful agencies for the progress of the world, and we should all bear our testimonies so that we all sound with one voice. We must tell the world how we feel about this land and this nation, and bear our testimonies about the great mission and destiny that it has. It is the negative, pessimistic comments about the nation that do as much harm as anything to the country today. Brethren, we must tell them in a positive way what they should be doing. We should not be so concerned about finding out what is wrong with America, but we should be finding what is right about America, and should be speaking optimistically and enthusiastically about America. So right here, you guys, I would invite you to consider that and ask yourself this question, because among people that are more conservative, people that kind of embrace certain theories, and I'm not saying that those theories are wrong, But I've seen people become very, very polarized and more extreme and more distrustful of just everything. You can't trust anything. You can't trust the news. You can't trust the government. You can't trust this. You can't trust that. And it's kind of, it's maybe a little bit crazy, a little bit. I'm not trying to downplay your concerns, and definitely there are corrupt people, but I think sometimes our view of things get really, really skewed, especially when it's in an echo chamber and all we do is consume is the same type of content. And you can essentially brainwash yourself when it comes down to it. I see people that are very, very paranoid, and then it starts to rub off on other people. And so I'm going to ask this again and ask this of yourself. Well, no, let me read this paragraph again. It is the negative, pessimistic comments about the nation that do as much harm as anything to the country today. Brethren, we must tell them in a positive way what they should be doing. We should not be so concerned about finding out what is wrong with America, but we should be finding what is right about America and should be speaking optimistically and enthusiastically about America. Later on in the talk, yes, men may fail, but this nation won't fail. I have faith in America, and you and I must have faith in America if we understand the teachings of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then lastly, I have this from President Down 8 Jokes. This is the April 2021 General Conference. Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution is the name of the talk. Our belief in divine inspiration gives Latter-day Saints a unique responsibility to uphold and defend the United States Constitution and principles of constitutionalism wherever we live. We should trust in the Lord and be positive about this nation's future. Okay, so before we go to our favorite, conspiracy theorist, before we start consuming doom and gloom entertainment by people that peddle that kind of thing, let's listen to the prophets and the apostles. I also want to point this out really quick. I have a spreadsheet called Quotes, False Prophecies / Visions. These are supposed prophecies and misunderstandings that keep getting passed around and accepted by people. And with some of these, we have prophets and apostles that have said that these prophecies are false. And most of them have to do with the destruction of America in very gruesome and horrific ways, which is a common theme with these type of things. So we have this one, Vision of the Destruction of America, and it's by Anonymous, by the way. People sometimes think that it's Wilford Woodruff because it was in his journal, because he was working in the church historian office and he came across this thing and he's like, okay, I need to find out who said this. So he wrote it down in his journal. And unfortunately, because of that, people then accept that to be a true prophecy. And then sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, this was John Taylor because he spoke French. Or at another time, I guess there were people that said that it was Joseph F. Smith that wrote it. And both him and Joseph Fielding Smith have come out and said, no, this is a false prophecy. And yet here we are in 2025 and people still pass this around. There's also the yellow dog prophecy that people apply specifically to Missouri. The church has already addressed this in the Ensign in an article called Missouri Myths. If you want to look it up, it's the April 1979 Ensign. And then you have other ones. You have some that I can't verify whether they're true or not, but that's the thing. You can't verify necessarily that they're true. And so you have to take it with a grain of salt. And so I have other ones that are just unverified. So we need to be careful with what we're accepting as reality. We need to do the work to try and validate what we're reading and not just get excited about things. And that's sometimes what people do. You can also look at this as another resource. Again, this is Quotes A through Z. I have like a billion quotes talking about the Constitution hanging by a thread. That's one that people like to write books about and speculate about and contemplate all these different things. And it's been pretty clearly said multiple times what it actually means. And it basically comes down to the preaching of the gospel, building up Zion, and being a righteous people. And that's essentially it. Okay, and then lastly, you may have been confused, especially if you're new to the channel or you haven't studied this on your own, about why Brigham Young would have said, that the flag of the United States would still be flying in the millennium. So I just want to share one last thing with you. So number one, we don't know what the transition is going to look like. A lot of people will read the scriptures and then come up with images in their head of how things are going to be. It seems so obvious when you read the scriptures, but the fact is we don't know all the details. And things probably are going to transition in a natural way. There's going to be abrupt things like when Christ comes, but other things are going to probably happen in a very natural way, in a way that's doable. Um, and so, and we have to remember that when we reach the millennium, we're not suddenly in heaven. And I think some people have that idea that it's suddenly heaven. No, we still have 1,000 years left to go of this earth's temporal existence, and it's still probation. It's just that we get leveled up from a telestial condition, which we're currently in, to a terrestrial condition. But it's still mortality. There's still trials and things that we have to go through, experiences that we have to go through in mortality. Okay. And not everybody is going to become a member of the church right away. So those are important things to understand as I read this quote. This is from President Brigham Young. You can find this in Millennial Star, September 23rd, 1854, page 595, Discourse by President Brigham Young. He says, "Will the saints rise from the dead? Yes. Who will know it? But a few. When the resurrection commences, I say, but a few will know it. And allow me to inform you, when you have seen Joseph and Hiram and Father Smith and many others risen from the dead, and you elders go abroad preaching, you will not tell the world of their resurrection, for they will not believe it. You may testify that Father Smith has arisen, that Joseph and Hiram again possess their bodies, that they again live in the flesh, and they will laugh you to scorn and persecute you to death if they have the power for your testimony's sake. Will the saints rise from the dead before the world is converted? Yes. You may despair of ever seeing all creation converted to the Lord Jesus or to the faith of the Holy Gospel. Will you see the resurrection? Yes, you will be in it and enjoy it. You will be in the first resurrection. Will the world believe it and know of it? They will not. Zion will be redeemed, the great temple of the Lord will be built, whereupon the glory of the Lord will rest. In a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, the saints will be gathering from all nations and will walk into the temples of God to do the work of redemption for their dead, and saviors will be upon Mount Zion to save the house of Esau. But will the nations know of it? They will not. And when the Lord reigns King of nations, as he does King of saints, the inhabitants of the earth will not distrust, but that it is the power of some great one that is the plans of wise men brought into action. Now, before I continue, I feel like what he's saying here, he's probably talking about the transition period, because I think at some point it will be clear that Christ is reigning. But again, a lot of times we think in very simplistic terms, in terms that are easy for us to understand. But that's not always what reality is. We're just trying to make sense of things. And so you have a hard time when it's like, well, he's going to come and he's going to appear to the entire world. It's going to be really obvious right away. Well, maybe it's not going to be right away. Like there's the appearance to the world and you assume that it's a singular event. And maybe there are like big things that will happen, but it still will not be clear to everybody exactly what happened. And then it's this transition process. It like takes time, and more and more is revealed to the world over time. You get maybe 100 years into the millennium, and then it's explained. Remember all the bright lights? Do you remember what we call the sign of the Son of Man? That was Jesus Christ. This is what we've been teaching you as we do missionary work. You didn't know it at the time. You knew something huge had just happened, that the world had changed. but you're accepting the gospel now, and now you realize what it was. And then as time goes on, I have other quotes that talk about the fact that eventually the entire world in the millennium, everyone will become members of the church. The gospel will go to everybody, and the older generations will pass away, the unbelieving, and then at some point that we don't know when, the entire world will be members of the church. And certainly at that point, it'll be clear and obvious and maybe even more open that Christ is reigning. But I wouldn't have a hard time with believing that there's probably going to be a transition. People still have to have their agency and still have to be tested and exercise faith. Okay, so continuing, thus they will be governed and controlled and overruled and led by the principles of the holy priesthood, and they will never mistrust, but that it is the doings of wise men at the head of a powerful nation. And I assume the nation that he's talking about is the United States, who was the first to have this type of constitution. Schooled in governmental affairs, who know how to control their own nation and then bring into subjugation their neighboring nations until the whole earth has become subject unto them. They will not know they will not know that it is the Savior who is ruling King of nations, as he does King of saints. A great portion of the inhabitants of the earth will never mistrust, but that it is the effects of the wisdom of men. Before I continue, a lot of people despise the United Nations. I get that. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the things, but you have, going back to when America was created, when it became a nation, you have this revolutionary new idea. And the United States is basically a coalition of smaller nations or states. It is one country, but it's divided up into states. They all have their own separate governments. And that idea has kind of spread into what we now have as the United Nations. It's supposed to be like the United States of America, the United States of Earth, right? And I think that a lot of it is probably pretty dysfunctional, corrupt, and you're right to feel certain ways about it, but I think that it's probably a forerunner, or it's like the beginning of what will become the Lord's government during the millennium. It'll probably be corrected. He's set up the framework, he's like started it right now, but I think that it has a purpose, as much as we may not really like it right now. The church has had contact with it, and there's been articles that have come out about them speaking to people at the United Nations. It's also interesting because we have this United Nations Peace Plaza over here across the street from the Temple Mount. So before you completely condemn it, I would suggest do not think in just black and white terms, where it's like, oh, it's either all bad or all good. Nothing is really like that. No one person, or a lot of things in life, there's a lot of gray. People are working things out. I think there's probably a lot of good that's done by it, and there's also a lot of bad. But I think that the Lord has a purpose for it, and it's based out of the United States. The headquarters is in New York City, so that's another thing. It's the charter was signed here in the United States. That's another thing that's coming out of the United States, which may not be so great right now, or not to everybody's liking, but I think it probably has a purpose. So when Brigham Young here is talking about one nation bringing into subjugation other neighboring nations, it may be referring to that. Not that right now nations are subjugated by it, but in the millennium, it's probably going to have more authority, most likely. Okay, so let's read this last paragraph and then we'll finish up. The saints will be instructed how to build up Zion, how to build temples, and do the work of redemption for their dead, and the wicked nations will know nothing about it. When the millennium is ushered in, no man or woman will know anything about it, only by the power of God. He will rule and reign, and his glory shall be in Zion, and the wicked not know it is the hand of our God. The saints will enjoy the light of his countenance, walk therein, and dwell in his presence. So again, I think he's talking about that transition period. And when he's talking about wickedness, there's still going to be wickedness in the millennium. It's just not going to be of a telestial kind. You're still going to have people that hold on to false beliefs and do bad things, just not of a telestial kind. So, okay, well, that's all that I have for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.